Hello and welcome to the 5th video on the jewelry box. This video we're going to be working on the lid, and we start by milling out some lumber. There's several different varieties of lumber for several different boxes on this project. So I'm showing how, using wood that's left over from other projects, I mill it down roughly to the right width and thickness for the frames of the jewelry box lid and then the panels. And this sequence just shows milling on the table saw the leftover lumber from other projects to be used for the lids. And this is some curly cherry. I've cut it to width, and here I'm cutting it to thickness. And I'm trying to show the beautiful curly cherry figure in the wood. So I'm setting the fence to about 9/16. That's about 14 millimeters, but it's going to be a little bit thicker than that so that there's material left to be sanded. And it's just a real light shave with the table saw getting things down. But some of the pieces are different thicknesses, so they all had to be done through this step before they go to the sanding machine. And these are going to be the frame parts for the lid. The panels have already been rough milled, and I can show that a little bit later in the video. So as I mill out the different species of wood, I stack everything here on the assembly table. You can see the boxes in the background there that are dry fitted together in the foreground of the different species of wood that I'll be using to make up the lids and the panels. So on the left is the frame stock, on the right is the panel stock. You can see where I ran some of the panel stock through the planer. There was a little bit of tear out, so I left it extra thick, and I tried to fix some of the tear out with super glue or CA glue, and that you can see with this curly maple, a little bit of tear out filled with CA. It's more than an 1/8 inch over thickness, so it all cleans up as it goes through the sander. And the next sequence is just setting up the sander, showing the boards going through first with the edges so that I get a precise width for the frame stock, and then I do the thickness, and then I do the panels. And you can see that even with running the boards through the table saw at the same width, you can see that all the boards aren't exactly the same width till they are finished in the sander. And there'll be just a real quick freeze frame here coming up. You can see the pencil lines, and then on one of the boards there is no pencil line. That one ended up being just a little bit wider, and that's why you use a sander to bring everything down to the final width. And we're just running through the frame stock, and then here are the panel pieces going through. I don't want to spend too much time showing sanding of wood, but just to get the point across that it's all really very precise, and it needs to be. Here are the frame and panel stock pieces after sanding and ready to be cut to length and moved over into joinery. Before we get into joinery, I just wanted to show the finished lid one more time, and so you can see that it's really critical that it be very flat, very straight on the edges, and the edges be parallel to the box. I'm going to open the lid so you can see the thickness. You can see the metal strike plate for the lock strike to fit into it. You see the bridle joint on the corner. You see the beautiful reveals between the frame and the panel, and the gap between the lid and the box. This is the hinge. It's a brass pin inside a brass bushing that goes all the way through. There's a round over on the back corner corner of the lid. That's what allows it to open and close. The flat of the lid back is what creates a stop, and you can see the washer there that creates the gap between the lid and the box without it slopping around. Between the lid and the box in this shot. So just a 32nd of an inch side to side, very clean fit where the front of the lid meets the box for the lock and the strike. And now we're going to take the frame parts and cut them to length. I've cut everything just a little bit oversized so that after glue up I can shave it down and get the right kind of fit. And along with how I did the sides of the box, I have a stop block with a secondary block. The first block is for the longer pieces that go side to side. That's what I'm cutting here. And then the second block is for the front to back pieces, and that's what I'm cutting here. I had to flip it around. I'm not going to show cutting all the frame stock, just an introduction just to show how this is done. After I cut the parts to length, I cut the shoulders on the pieces with tenons. Those are the pieces that run front to back. And I don't have that in the video, but I go from cutting things to length to cutting the cheeks, the long pieces of the tenons. And it's a good idea when you, after cutting things to length, that you clean up the burrs on the side. It's just one of those things that can get in the way of really crisp shoulders, is if you have something that doesn't come out perfectly square. And that's the same with the corners from the sander. They also need to get wiped down to get any burrs and extra fuzz off the corners of all the parts. Now I'm cutting the sides of the tenons, we call the cheeks. The fence is set so the outside surface is being cut by the table saw blade so that the fence and the blade aren't in contact. And it's just a quick pass. One pass cuts both sides. And we're looking for something that's about 3/16, 5 millimeters for the thickness of the tenon. And now this piece is cutting what would be the mortise or the slot in the long pieces that go side to side. The slot is thicker than the table saw blade, so you make two passes referencing both sides so that you get something that's very precise and accurate to the thickness of the tenon. And I show doing that here a couple of times. I don't want to show it for too much, and then I should be showing how they fit together. But it's just a simple piece of plywood clamped to the fence, and the blade is up. The height of the width of the frame parts, which is about 1 5/16 or 33 millimeters. You want it to be real flush when the edges come together in the frame when it's fitted together. So I'm going to jump ahead and show the fitting of the mortise and tenons together. I've got a sample one there that I started, and you can see it's a snug fit. You want something that is a really close tolerance fit, maybe just a little bit of sanding with 180 grit to get the tenon and the surfaces of the slot smooth and fitted together. So now that it's fitted together, I'm going to lay it on the table saw table just to check it for flatness, and it's really flat for a dry fit. It'll get cleaned up and made more flat as it goes through the sanding after the glue up. But for right now, that's looking pretty good. The next step is to cut the groove for the panel, and I'll be doing that with the router table and a 3/16" slotting cutter that'll be shown in the next sequence. This is a router table. It has a 3 horsepower Porter cable router in it. This is a 3/16" slot cutter, 3 wings with a bearing. The bearing allows for a very deep depth of cut that we won't be using, so the fence will be between the edge of the board and the bearing. Very simple, works really well, and I'll be showing setting up and cutting the slot cutter. I have a feather board there, and it's critical that the groove be right in the center of the board. The slot is only 3/16 plus a 64th thick wide, so the 3/16" groove has to be centered very precisely in the middle of the board to do that, and I'm trying to show that here. And I think I'll get the dial gauge and put that on it so that you can see it's just the tiniest bit over 3/16 on both sides of the slot, and that's really important for making everything fit together later on. So here's the frame for the poplar box. You can see the triangles showing the alignment of everything so that I'm cutting the inside edges of the frame and that the bottom surface of the frame is against the table so that there's no alignment issues later on. It's real straightforward. With the router, the bit's real sharp and it cuts a nice clean slot, and the feather board takes care of any little bit of flex that's in the parts, but it goes real smoothly. There's no problem. The long pieces are a through cut, so they go right from one slot to the other, and the shorter pieces have a stop cut. This is similar to doing the groove in the sides for the bottom panel, and it's just real straightforward. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's important to see that how it's done. A little bit of downward pressure just to make sure there's no lifting of the board as it goes through the cutter, but it turned out really well. You can see the stop blocks for the shorter pieces. That keeps the slot from going through where you would see it on the ends of the joinery where the bridle joint is exposed on the edges of the lid. Just a real clean cut, leaving enough clearance for the panel to fit in without going through the edges of the part. I'm going to show it dry fitted again just to show how the slots align for the panel grooves and the joinery. Really important that everything is a clean, snug fit. That way the panel aligns inside the frame, there's no twisting, and there's not a lot of racking, and everything stays square, and that's how you get the real clean fit of the lid inside the box later on. I'm going to try to show the groove and where the groove aligns with the two different pieces. It's hard to see, but you can see a little bit there. It worked out really well. The next step is to raise the panel so that it fits inside the frame for the lid. This is very similar to the bottom panel, except the profile is cut on both sides. It shows how it fits for a sample piece, and then now the real lid that's coming through. I do the end grain first, and then there'll be a little bit of tear out where the cutter exits the end grain, and that gets cleaned up when you do the side grain, and that's why you do the end grain first. It's just similar to the bottom panel. There's not a lot to it, but what is important is that the tongue of the panel is sanded so that any little ridges where the corners are, where the end grain cut meets the side grain cut, are sanded clean so it doesn't introduce any twisting to the frame. And I'll try to show that here coming up when I dry fit the frame in a second. See, there's a little bit of burr from the cutter, but it's a nice clean straight line, not a lot of problem where the corners come together. And here's the dry fit showing the parts. I had the frame partially assembled and the panel slips in real snug, just a little tiny bit of sanding with 220 grit and it'll move freely. I put it in there. It's February, so the panel was made a little bit narrow, and you can see at the end I have to adjust the reveals between the panel and the frame to get everything to look even. But it's a good looking frame and panel. It has to be trimmed about a 1/16 of an inch, about a 32nd on both sides, so that it fits in to the between the sides. The front and back of the sides haven't been trimmed down yet. But that's it. Thank you so much.